So welcome to another war game review by theplayersaid.com. Today we're taking a look at the expansion for Labyrinth, the War on Terror, and the expansion is called Labyrinth, the Awakening, and it's 2010 until question mark.
I'm awoke.
So, the original game covered from 2001 onwards, and then basically this expansion saying, well, that the events there kind of stopped at 2010, which is about when the game was released, and this expansion is kind of like the 5 years since then. So this goes, there's events up until like 2015 or so. Big things that the game covers and adds is it covers what's referred to as the Arab Springs, which is a series of political and civil unrest that spread throughout the Arab world and caused multiple civil wars in different countries. It caused regimes to topple and a lot of change and instability in the region, which is obviously what the game's about. Mm-hmm. And that is depicted in the game by awakening and reaction markers. And those, at first, don't seem like they're doing a lot, but over time they grow and grow and grow, and they start to affect the alignment of countries as well as the level of governance, mm-hmm. without you having to roll on the global war, or the war of ideas tables, things like that. So some of the politics takes care of itself once you set the ball rolling. That's a really cool element from the expansion that I really liked.
And actually, I did end up liking that. I think at first I was, very hesitant because I feel like Labyrinth, the War on Terror is perfect as it is. And I felt like this new mechanic, in essence, created a new game. It created a new experience, a new set of concerns that you had to worry about or be aware of. And I just felt like it was so different than the base. But by the end, I think once I saw the benefit of the awakening markers and the abject horror of what the reaction markers could do, I started to think, yeah, this is just another level of depth. It's just another layer that is added to the game to make it, in my opinion, a really great game.
And it wasn't too bookkeeping-y, to coin a phrase. And that's one thing that I was concerned about, that it might be that it was like, just more stuff to take care of, but really it's not. It wasn't.
Well, you put the markers out on the board and you kind of go every round. You just check them, and if there's two if there's two or more, you add one.
Yeah.
But
that went very quickly. It wasn't like, okay.
Yeah, very simple.
You kind of just bashed through it.
It just became another line on the turn sequence.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Other new aspects of the game, there's a few new countries. So you have Mali and Nigeria, and those are included in there because of the Arab Springs and some of the things that they added, historically speaking.
And we pretty much ignored those almost for the most part.
Yeah, and that's due to the game that we played.
Right.
We
were focused in other areas.
Syria and Iran have new kind of overlays. So Iran has the option to change to an actual playable Muslim country, not that kind of special condition yellow one that it has. And Syria, the overlay just adds, there's a capacity for WMDs there as well.
More scary WMDs, as if there wasn't enough.
Yeah. Something else that's new in the game is the Civil War. And whenever you have the reaction and the awakening markers, those countries can be thrown into civil war, and those markers get changed to cells, and a new component, these little blue wooden militia, and we'll talk about those a bit later when we show you the board. But basically, all this kind of abstract influence that's going on in the country becomes kind of pieces on the board, and they're fighting, and you'll roll attrition every turn as well. But that's basically all the new stuff in the game.
Aside from an entire new deck of cards.
Yeah, so, and that's all. I mean, there was a few events which are the same ones that they moved over, slightly different wording to kind of include or exclude certain new aspects, but almost everything in that deck is new and very, very different. Like you pointed out whilst we were playing, very different, especially for the US player, the things that the cards do and how it feels to play those.
Well, I think you made a very good point, and I'll give you credit for this, but at the time the game was made, at the time the game occurred, right? The events of the game are from 2010 and on. Obviously, the presidency was a little different than it was under the first game.
Yeah.
And a little different outlook and a little different posture on terror. And those cards were very reflective, I believe, of the policies of the U.S. government at that time. And I told Alexander several times when I would discard cards at the very end of a round as my only action, just to get rid of it because it was so bad for me. I was like, man, those are really bad. And we played Labyrinth 5, 6, maybe 7 times.
Yeah.
I know you've played Solitaire. I'm going to try Solitaire soon. I'd gotten very comfortable with those cards and understood what they were doing. These were very different. I just felt like these were even one more step towards making it more difficult for the United States to do well.
And that may have been a balancing thing, because I've heard that they say that the game slightly favors the US, and maybe they've tried to address that. And even with that, you still won.
Right.
So,
but I won literally by playing my very last card. And that changed the country to good, and I was able. So it wasn't like I ran away with it or you ran away with it. It was very balanced.
And that's what I like. And Labyrinth, fantastic game. This is also it's really good. It's very different, and I kind of want to treat it almost as its own game.
Right.
Because it feels very differently and plays in a different way, and you have to approach things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Just because the cards are so different. And the cards, it's a CDG, the cards drive what the game is. So with all that in mind...
This game, I love Labyrinth. I think we've said that. We wrote strategy articles on it. You've done a review. I love this game. It is very frustrating. And if you know me and play with me, Alexander will tell you this maybe privately. And I get very frustrated from time to time when I cannot do something that I know should be done. Or some card really just reaches its hand in my chest and pulls my heart out, my beating heart out. And I think in Labyrinth it's like that, and I've really grown accustomed to that and really like that. But this expansion, I didn't like it at first. I think I really like it now. After the one play, I'd love to explore it some more and try it out. I really enjoyed the Arab Springs and the Awakening and that struggle. It was just another struggle, right? It was another level of things we were trying to fight each other on. And early on, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about this when we turn the board over or we get the board in the view. I focused, I think, a little more on it at the very beginning, and it paid off greatly for me at the end of the game.
It's a long-term investment.
Yeah. I think I had 5 or 6 Awakening markers after the first round. I think I start with 1, but I was able to get more, and that they kind of snowball. They build on each other, and I don't know, really cool, very neat concept. Nice job.
Okay, so let's take a look at the board and we'll talk about some of these in a bit more depth. Okay, so here's a look at the board at the end of our game. We played through the deck once using the Arab Springs scenario, which is, it actually has kind of a seeded deck, which we'll talk about a little bit here in just a second, and plays out more historically than just having a random deck. Grant won the scenario by having more than twice as many resources as me, and he had one more than that required amount.
Versus your 3. And it all boiled down to, and you might be talking about this, this area here, Gulf States, that's where it kind of boiled down to, or wait, where was it? Pakistan. We've removed the stuff. This came over. Sorry. Anyway, it boiled down to Pakistan because of some plots had gotten to that point, and I had my very last card, allowed me to move this over, and then at the end my Awakening markers changed it to a good resource, which gave me the victory there at the very end.
So the new aspects of the board, which showed you kind of from afar, these couple countries here. So Iran now has a second side, which is now fully playable. Get that in focus here. And then Syria now has a weapons of mass destruction symbol on it, and it starts with 2 stacked on it. And then you have a couple countries, you have Nigeria and Mali. Nigeria's got a double side as well. And those start down here in these lapsing event boxes, but really that's just to show that they're adjacent here, and this one's adjacent up here. And they give you lapsing tokens to mark those cards so you don't place them on the board here. You've got a couple new player aids to change the end of turn sequence, and this kind of explains what the Arab Springs does at the end of each turn. Basically, these little markers, and you have reaction markers and awakening markers. One for each side. The awakening markers go with the US side, and those represent kind of more free and democratic or anti-establishment thinking that's going on in those countries, and the reaction ones are kind of, very traditional or reactionary thought that's being pumped in from extremist sources, in this case, the jihadist side. Those are placed mostly through cards, but the way that they work is at the end of each turn is depending on the net kind of number that will affect the game. So if in Egypt, for example, if you had 3 of these awakening and 1 reaction, and that's 2, and that means on the little table, which is kind of explained here as well, they would gain 1 more awakening marker. And whilst that doesn't inherently do anything, the following turn, if things stay the same, if you have a net of 3 points, one way or the other, then it starts to affect the alignment of that country. Also go from neutral to ally, or from neutral to adversary, for example. And then it can start getting into, if you're a poor adversary and you've got 3 reaction their net, it's going to become Islamist rule. You don't have to do any major jihads. You don't have to spend any of those precious resources.
It just happens.
We'll do it on its own. And the same goes the other side of the spectrum. If you've got a fair ally, they'll just become good. You don't have to spend... and some of those War of Ideas roles, some of those major jihad roles, very difficult to achieve. And this kind of just naturally changes the layout of the board. And that was something that was fascinating to see. Because at first, it's just a blue marker here, blue marker there. 4 turns later, you're kind of scratching your head going like, how did I get in this position? And watching that naturally unfold, I thought it was very, very, very interesting.
What I found with the Awakening, I was the US, so the Awakening markers were the ones that I was concerned about. I found that every card that came up, if I could get an Awakening marker or 2 down, I felt like I tried that. And I think that's something I focused on. Whereas a lot of times I might have needed really to do something else. I really tried to focus on that. And that's why it gave me such a lead. And I think the power of those is they just kind of snowball. They continue to multiply. And when you finally affect the level of governance or improve it to a certain level, you then get to roll on a random table and put an awakening marker somewhere else. And that was kind of cool because it allows those ideas to spread. And I think that was a very cool concept. I enjoyed that considerably.
What I actually really liked was that we played the historical scenario. And what you have here is there's a couple cards, and I'm going to bring those up here so you can kind of see the symbols on them. You have the AK here, and then you have the protester here. These protester ones are more to do with the Arab Springs and how that spread. There are 20 cards with that symbol on, and they're seeded through the first half of the deck. And then the ones with the weapon on them, those are seeded, there's 20 of those through the second half of the deck. So you'll naturally have more of a spread of the awakening and reaction. And in the second half of the game, you'll see those turn into a lot of civil wars or much more kind of violent expressions of political opinions. That was something that I thought, that's how I think I would always want to play this game if I was wanting to kind of do a bit more of the learning side of this. Because I learned a lot from reading the rule book, reading the playbook, which is included in the rule book, and just looking through the cards and seeing it play out. And obviously, I bought this game and then I just went on the internet and did a lot of research just to this is what this was talking about. And the rulebook does a great job, but there's more and more I want to learn from playing these games.
Yeah. The only concern I have with the board and the setup, they went to a great deal of trouble, GMT did, to put in these tiles that we showed you earlier, and they seamlessly fit into and cover up or cover over existing conditions on the game board from Labyrinth. Now down on the left-hand side, which you can see over there, that's where the new countries Mali and Nigeria are located. One of the comments I made to Alexander, I would have loved to have seen them make basically a cardboard piece that would have replaced that part of the board, because I felt like we kind of forgot about those countries in some ways because there were no lines moving down towards them. I feel like if you went to the trouble to do this, add a couple of dollars to the expansion and do a little cardboard cover-up so that those lines these lines would have been printed down here so you could see very clearly what was adjacent and what was not. That was, to be honest, I think that was one of my only nitpicky items that I thought could have been improved.
There are some stuff, so there's a whole aspect of the expansion which is to do with establishing a caliphate and spreading that throughout the whole kind of Arab world. Never even came up.
I saw the cards a couple times, but I made sure and either got rid of those or
the events on those were so good that I only ever saw one in the whole game, and I used it for the event. So there are aspects of this game I've still not even explored that would add, an even extra layer on top of all the ones that there are of strategy and thinking to this game. All in all, I was very happy with the expansion. The cards are obviously the kind of like the crux of the game. Mm-hmm. The cards allow you to do what you want to do, and they are so different from the base game that's what I'm happy with. Some of the things are similar, but historically and just like the kind of feeling you get from using those cards and what they can do makes this game feel so different. Mm-hmm. There's far fewer of the skilled martyrdom cards. I think there's 3 in the base game. There's only 1 in this one, I believe. So there's less.
Those are really good cards.
There's less extremism in some of the cards, and there's a lot more influencing in a more peaceful way, or
a little different. Different focus.
Very different thinking in this game.
I liked it.
Yeah, that's the board, and this is kind of how we ended up. And every game's very different, but I felt like this one played out historically in its manner, and I really, really enjoyed that. So let's have a quick wrap up. So that was a look at the board for Labyrinth: The Awakening. I have to remember to get the names right. I was getting confused. My final thoughts and kind of wrap up is I thought this was an excellent game, and whilst the game didn't need an expansion, this is welcome in that it just provides a very different outlook on what is essentially a progression of what the War on Terror has become. And it feels very different. To me, it feels very different, both the cards and the New Awakening stuff that's going on. And I also think this is very, very interesting, like, historical exploration. I feel like this has much more got that simulation aspect in it than Labyrinth does. Labyrinth is much more kind of do what you want to do. Here you have this background of what historically happened going on as well, and that just adds a little extra layer of depth as well, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and I very much enjoyed the expansion. Once again, love Labyrinth. I think this is a very nice expansion. Really enjoyed the awakening mechanics, the reaction mechanics. The Civil War, I think while it affected the game, I don't know that it truly made a huge difference. I did use militia a couple of different times in a couple interesting ways. But overall, very, very different experience, in my opinion, from the Labyrinth base game. From the starting position to the starting position in the countries, I really liked it. I think this is definitely an expansion that doesn't necessarily expand upon the game, but it almost adds a new element to the game that makes it a different experience.
Yes.
And I think that's a good thing. I think you now, in essence, have 2 games out of the same game, and I think that's good.
Yes.
So I enjoyed it. Thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I love this game. I would play this again immediately, which is a good judge to me of how a game is.
Right.
So that's Labyrinth: The Awakening by GMT Games. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.